Hey, friends, this is Sophie here with Sprinkle with Soil. Welcome back to the Call to Farms, the podcast where we explore the stories of those who've answered the call to return to the land, embracing sustainable living and traditional skills. I'm your host, Sophie, and today we have a special guest who's taken the art of homesteading to a whole new level, or should I say, a whole new culture. Our guest today is Robyn Jackson, the creative force behind Cheese from Scratch. Robyn's journey into the world of cheese making began in 2014 with a surprise that would change her life forever: a milk cow, courtesy of her husband, a former dairy farmer from Wisconsin. What started as a necessity to handle gallons of daily milk production quickly became a passion. Today, Robyn has transformed that passion into a thriving business, teaching thousands of aspiring cheesemakers around the world through her online courses, live speaking engagements, where I ran into her at the Modern Homesteading Conference in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and her popular monthly membership club, the Milkmaid Society. With over 150,000 followers on Instagram, Robyn has become a go to source for quality, real life cheese making tips and tricks. Her Homestead Cheesemaking 101 course has equipped countless students with the skills to turn their milk into delicious cheeses. But Robyn's story isn't just about cheese, it's about family, sustainability, and the joy of working together to produce your own food. Along with her husband and three children, Robyn is living the homesteading dream, learning and growing every single day. So, from her surprise cow to now a cheese empire, Robyn's journey embodies the spirit of answering the call to farms. Hey, Robyn, how are you today?
Good, thanks. How about you?
Good, good. I am so excited to have you on the Call to Farms podcast. This has been several years since I found you on Instagram. It was one of your reels where you had a whole cheese wheel and you were just talking about, here are some of the reasons why you want to be cautious about it. And you just threw the whole cheese wheel out. But we're so excited because I have wanted to talk about making cheese from scratch. And I wouldn't say I've been on a journey, but I've been looking into this with the works of David Asher and his Art of Natural Cheesemaking book. But yeah, I'm just so excited to have you on and have you share your story with us.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. And yes, David Asher is the art of natural cheese making. He's definitely the king of it all.
We love to kick off and ask how you and your family answered the call to farms.
Oh, that's a good question. I was actually born and raised on a cattle ranch, like really close to where we are now. And then I met and married my husband, Zach, who actually his family bought the ranch right next to us. They're originally from Wisconsin and they moved to Canada. And yeah, we had like a fence line love story. Ended up marrying, and then we bought our own ranch. So it was kind of just we grew up with it, and Zach always wanted to be a rancher. Like that's why he moved with his parents to Canada, because he wanted to farm. And I kind of like, even though I grew up on a farm, I never really knew if that's what I wanted to do. But then I just kind of I followed him into it, and his family was really big into like preserving. So I learned how to can from his mom. I learned how to garden from his dad. So I kind of just learned all these things from them. And then they had originally been dairy farmers in Wisconsin. So my husband always wanted to get another milk cow, even though we had beef cows at this point. He wanted to get a milk cow. So he brought a milk cow home one day, and that kind of snowballed me into my cheese making journey. So that's sort of how I guess, stayed in farming.
And where are you located now?
We're still in pretty much the same spot. We're like 5 minutes from where I grew up in British Columbia, Canada. So kind of northern a little bit. Yeah, like we get cold winters and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so cool. So I love that story that you were the girl next door. In a
Yeah,
sense,
exactly.
farm girl next door. Okay, so then growing up with cattle and farm animals wasn't foreign to either of you. How was that transition to getting that first dairy cow?
So it wasn't bad for Zach at all, because like he grew up with dairy cows. He knows all the things, and like to this day, he's like my milk cow mentor. Like I go to him if I have a question, because he grew up in it. He knows probably knows the answer and knows where to look to find the answer. So that was really helpful jumping into dairy cows, but it definitely was a transition. And I think I came into it with a lot of stigma too, because like the people in our area that we were very much a beef farming area. And so there was a lot of stigma around having a family milk cow. Like, why wouldn't you just go to the grocery store and buy your
Mm.
milk? Like, that's way easier. It's not even that much money. Like, just do that. So there was kind of some stigma coming into it. And I didn't even really want to do it at first, but then I sort of fell in love with it. And then now it's just kind of cool. Like, my husband was gone this week, and my milk cow actually calved this week. And I was just kind of proud of myself. I did it. Like, she didn't have any troubles, and it was all good. But like I kind of knew the things that I needed to watch for, and yeah, it just kind of was like a moment in my little farming journey that I was like, oh, I can actually do this. Like, I've learned how to do this, so that's kind of cool. I mean, there was definitely parts where you're like uncertain and stuff, but yeah.
So then I was reading through your bio. You have been doing dairy cattle for quite some years then.
Yeah, I think we got our first one in 2014.
That's right.
Yeah, 2014 would be when we got our first dairy cow.
Okay. So how did you start getting into cheese making?
My That was like the first kind of thing that my husband asked when, so he brought this dairy cow home. I didn't actually know that he was bringing it home. I came home and there's this milk cow, but I knew it was going to come eventually. Like, he always was just talking about this. And he was like, "Hey, can you make me cheese?" Because he's from Wisconsin, the cheese state. And I kind of, at that point, I had been in my homesteading journey for a little bit. Like, I like to bake bread and I grew a garden and stuff. So I was like, okay, I will try to do this. And so I just got a cheese making book and started kind of working my way through it. And I made a lot of fails. Like, there was so many fails. Still to this day, there's sometimes fails. But yeah, I just kind of started doing it and learned and fell in love with it. Same kind of as with milk cows.
That's so fascinating that your husband or you came home to find a milk cow in front of your house.
Yeah, I know.
How was
Well, I mean,
that? Like,
what's one more cow? Like, I guess. But the funny thing is, because I grew up like with beef cows, I thought that it would be really similar, but then it was not, like, not even close to similar. So that was like a big adjustment, just like getting my brain around it. Because I was like, I know cows, like I know how to take care of a cow. And then I realized, no, I don't know how to take care of a dairy cow. They have different needs. They are almost like a different just species of animals in themselves. So that was a big adjustment.
that's true. Yeah, we don't get all that up in close and personal with our beef cattle. We keep them in zone 4, zone 5 for permaculture. But our dairy cows, we touch, right? We brush them. We're handling
Yeah.
them every day. You're right. It is almost like a completely different animal compared to our beef cattle.
Yeah, exactly. And just learning all the different illnesses that they're more prone to, like milk fever and ketosis, and the diets that they need are different than like what would be feeding our beef cows and stuff like that. So that was like a big adjustment that I didn't foresee when we first got milk cows.
Wow. So how many gallons of milk are you getting a day?
Well, right now, because she just calved, I'm getting 4 gallons. Yeah. So she
Okay.
calved on Friday. And so she'll continue to, well, she'll continue to increase as she goes here. But I'm also trying to calf share with her. So I'm taking it day by day with calf sharing. But yeah, I'm getting 2 gallons in the morning and 2 gallons at night right now.
Okay. So you have one dairy cow.
I have a little tiny herd, but one in milk right now. And
One in
then yeah, I've got a heifer that's going to calve in September. And then we've got some nanny cows for the ranch too. So that was another, like, kind of when we got into it, one of the purposes of it was like, okay, we can take this milk for the house, but we can also use the milk for other animals on the ranch, because we have quite a big ranch. We have like 200 beef
Oh,
cows. So if we've got a twin or something, we can pull the twin off and put it on the cow, or we can have extra milk for if we have a bottle baby or anything like that.
oh, that's awesome. Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
4 gallons a day is quite a bit.
Yeah, but not in terms of cheese making. I was like, oh man, only 4 gallons, because this is my first time freshening with this cow. I got her last year when she was already in lactation. And yeah, and then I wasn't sure how much, but like 4 gallons is like, she will increase a little bit here. But I was like, oh darn, I'd really like 6 gallons. But
Well, then you have the heifer will be and
Yeah,
milk
exactly.
soon.
Then
Yeah.
then I'll have a lot of milk. So yeah.
And is there like with cheese making, so I'm completely new to it, like in terms of like hard cheese. I have made mozzarella, I've made cream cheese, I've made sour cream. So the soft cheeses I've done, but I haven't yet ventured into like hard cheeses. So with hard cheese, does it matter how much cream you have in your milk content, like in your cheese?
Yeah, sort of. But usually, like, what I'll do, it depends on which type of cheese you're making. Like, usually, what I'll do, it doesn't matter what type of cheese I'm making. I'm going to use like some fresh from the udder milk that hasn't cream lined at all. And then I'm going to take so that would be, so last night's milk, say. I would take that milk and I would skim the cream off of it and put it into the pot. And then this morning's milk that was fresh, warm from the udder, I would put that into the pot. And then that would be what I would make my batch of cheese with. So I've got some full cream milk in there and then some skim milk. And the reason that I do that is just because then I have the cream to make butter and sour cream. Because if I don't do that, then I make too much cheese and I don't have enough butter. So I have to kind of watch myself with that. So it does matter, but I don't pay too much attention to it. You know, like I'm not making full skim milk cheeses usually, unless I'm making like a Parmesan or a Alpine style cheese. But usually I'm doing kind of that hybrid half batch.
Okay. Okay, so that's great to know because my ice cream, I
Yeah.
mean, we sometimes when we have way too much cream, that's what I'm using. I don't even mix in, like, milk with it. I just do, like, 4 cups of cream.
Nice. I like that. And see, like, I like a high butterfat cow because then you've got it like
Yeah.
for all those other things. And with cheese making, it does matter. Like, you make really good cheeses if you have a higher butterfat, but you still make really good cheeses if you have a lower butterfat. It's kind of cool. Like in our homesteading journey, like we've had Holsteins that we've
Mhm.
had multiple cows. We've actually gone through like quite a few cows. We've had Holsteins straight off the dairy farm that some of them aren't producing very big cream lines at all, and we've had ones that are producing really good cream lines. I've had a Jersey, so I've had multiple different cows with multiple different milk compositions, and they've all made good cheese. So that's kind of the takeaway from that you can make good cheese with all of them.
That's great. And obviously, you can make cheese with pasteurized milk, but one of the things that you specialize in is making it with raw milk. And have you in your cheese making journey, were there any differences in how you found any differences between raw and pasteurized milk in making cheese?
Yeah, so I definitely don't have like the experience to back me in making pasteurized milk cheese because I don't really ever have to make it. Like I've tested some recipes, like buying some milk from the store just to test some recipes for like I've got a Christmas ebook and stuff that can be made with pasteurized milk. But I would definitely say that there's people out there that are more knowledgeable about it than me. One big difference is that milk that has been pasteurized and the calcium content in it has been damaged, and the calcium plays a really big role in milk being able to coagulate. So you have to add something called calcium chloride into that milk before you add in the rennet. So it's a simple fix. You just add your calcium chloride in. It's like a quarter teaspoon of calcium chloride per gallon of milk. And you add that in before you add in your rennet, and then your curd should coagulate good enough. The one thing is you can't use ultra pasteurized milk. So ultra pasteurized milk has like gone too far. It can't be made into cheese.
What about homogenized milk? Is there
Homogenized milk works, but I've like again, I'm not the best person to talk about pasteurized milk cheese making, but I've experimented a little bit with non-homogenized and homogenized. And I had a really hard time getting a good curd with the stuff that had been homogenized versus the stuff that had not been, that could still creamline. It's coagulated beautifully. And like I put that calcium chloride in, I had no problems. It was just like working with raw milk. But
okay.
the homogenization, it was like a much weaker curd. And that could have just been the specific milk, but I kind of have heard that. But I know that a lot of people do because sometimes that's only what people have access to. There's
Mhm.
actually a really good Facebook page. It's called Learn to Make Cheese. And there's 3 admins on there, I think, and all of them are just really helpful. And there's a lot of people over there that make cheese with like homogenized pasteurized milk because that's the only thing they have access to.
Wow.
Um, yeah.
So I don't like, not off the top of my head, do I know the benefits of eating raw cheese? I know raw dairy, and we make our own raw yogurt, but is there some special effect that happens during the fermentation period? I know it's obviously longer fermentation with cheese making, but what is the primary benefit as to why one would want to eat raw cheese versus normal cheese that you could get at the grocery store?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think that it depends what kind of cheese you're comparing it to. Like if it's like Kraft Kraft singles, you obviously don't want to eat that because there's a whole huge ingredient list on it. But some of the grocery store cheese is made really well. You look at their ingredient list, there's only those four ingredients of milk, culture, rennet, and salt. Like I would be fine eating those just as much as I would be fine eating my raw milk cheeses at home. I think in terms of fermentation with raw milk cheeses, it's not like, I wouldn't say that it's absolutely the best, like, it's absolutely so much better than the cheeses that are made with pasteurized milk. I think that they're both really good cheeses. The raw milk has kind of it's cool because you've got all sorts of different microbes in there. They're gonna help with aging, and so you're gonna have kind of different nuances in your cheeses and stuff like that, so that's kind of a cool part of the fermentation, but a lot of it comes down to the starter cultures that you're using. And I know we wanted to talk about clabber in today's podcast, which will be kind of cool because that's, I feel, where you start to see more of the differences. Like for me, that's the difference. Like I don't care if I use pasteurized milk or raw milk, but I'm really excited about clabber culture because it's a super cool culture and it really sets your milk up to be able to make amazing cheeses.
Okay, I'm excited to talk about clabber because I hope that I'm not the only one out there. Like, we make our own sourdough, we have our own sourdough starter, we make tons of different things with our sourdough starter, and then we also clabber our milk. But the extent that we clabber, we feed to our meat chickens and our chickens and then our dogs.
Yeah.
I haven't yet psychologically gotten over using that clabber as a somewhat sourdough starter to make other dairy products using that clabber. And
Yeah.
so, one, I'm kind of curious, are there other of your students out there that have also felt the same way? And two, like, how do I overcome this?
Yeah, for sure. So, for those that don't know, clabber is a raw milk culture. You put it on a counter, you feed it every single day, just how you might feed a sourdough starter, and you can use it as a starter culture for cheese making. So, there's kind of, I guess people kind of get confused between clabber, that is just milk that you let sit out and it clabbers, and then you go and you feed it to the kitchen, to the chickens, versus clabber that's actually kept as a starter culture. So, that's like the biggest probably one of the biggest things I do teaching around is to just that there's a difference between those two things. So that clabber that you keep for the chickens that you just left that raw milk out, you left it for like 3 days or something and it clabbered and then you went and fed it to the chickens. The chickens love it. But that one, you could just take it and you could take a little bit of that and you could feed it to new fresh milk, and those bacteria that are in that new fresh that clabber are going to ferment in that new fresh milk. So every time you're giving it a new food source, you're essentially kind of being able to keep it safe. So I guess I'll just talk about a little bit like what the mechanism behind that is, because that sometimes helps put people's mind at ease. So in raw milk, there's all sorts of different bacterias. And one big head category of different bacteria is a type called lactic bacteria, which you said you do like vegetable fermentations and stuff.
Yep, and we do.
Yes. So it's the same lactic bacteria. The cows probably actually get it from eating the grass. So these lactic bacteria, they are living in the gut of the cow and then they come through in the milk. And so they like to feed on lactose, which is the sugar in milk. So as they start to feed on this lactose, they ferment it into lactic acid. And when it gets acidic enough in that milk, it coagulates it. So when you see that you've got coagulated clabber, this is your sign that those lactic bacteria in there, they're really strong and they're healthy and they're prolific. But when you start to see that there's separation in your clabber culture, so you left that chicken bucket out and all of a sudden now there's a little bit of whey on top of it,
Mhm.
that's your sign that those lactic bacteria have started to die off and kind of other mechanisms, other bacterias and funguses have started to grow in the milk. And they're not necessarily dangerous, could be not necessarily dangerous, but one way that we do keep our starter cultures really healthy and good for cheese making is we're making sure we feed them new fresh milk when they're at this peak point, when they've coagulated the milk and they haven't started to die off and they're really prolific in that milk. So that's one way that I kind of talk to people about the safety around it and feeling more comfortable with it, is that if you are feeding it every day, you're going to be able to keep it healthy and good for cheese making. And the mechanism behind it is really, really similar to keeping a sourdough starter. Like that's like the best comparison because they're so similar, the two kind of processes.
Okay. Okay. I think so that's something that you'd have to feed every day, the clabber.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And then do you have to have like sourdough? Is there a discard or anything, or do you use that?
Yeah, no, you have a discard. So you would take, say you started with a pint jar. You put a full pint jar of fresh, nice warm milk. That's because that's the best way to start it. Fresh, nice warm raw milk. It's got to be raw on the counter. You let it sit until it coagulated. And then you're going to take like a tablespoon of it and you're going to feed it to new, fresh, raw milk. And that discard is your whole coagulated jar. And so you can use that. That first one, you'll probably just want to feed it to the chickens because it doesn't taste that good, that first ferment, but
Mhm.
the more and more you feed it, the better it's going to start to taste. And then that discard is going to become your cheese making starter culture. So that's going to be what you're adding into your cheese pot. But I also just use it around the kitchen, like just like how you and eventually just find uses for sourdough discard. Like, you're making waffles with it or whatever. Like I make waffles with it. I use it as like in replace of all the milk I would be using in like
Mm,
baking recipes. I use it as a base for dressings. I feed it to my kids like yogurt. Like
okay.
they can't even really taste the difference between like regular yogurt and clabber culture once you get it to be a good point. Because first, like I said, when you're first like just feeding it to the chickens, it doesn't taste good. But the longer you go along the line of fermentation, the better it starts to taste.
That is really exciting, and I
Yeah.
love what you're doing too, because we do that with our yogurt. We make a Vietnamese yogurt, and then we make our plain yogurt, but I often sneak in our sourdough bread. I put in the Vietnamese yogurt, and I put in milk, and so I feel
Yeah.
like it's like another way to ferment or add a dish, like stacking fermentation in it.
Yeah.
But waffles and so nothing goes to waste, and I love that about just cheese making and having all this excess milk because
Yeah.
when we have our meat chickens and we clabber the milk, I feel like I'm not wasting, but, it and so we don't try to throw anything away on our farm, but sometimes I'm like, "Oh, outside of just skimming it and letting it clabber, I wonder if I could make cheese." Like, that's something I haven't gotten to, so I'm really excited that we can have this conversation, that we connected.
Yeah, it's so cool. Like clabber has kind of changed my life in terms of cheese making. Like that sounds really dramatic to say, but it's been so cool in being able to fit cheese making better into my homestead because everything is based with clabber. Like every dairy product that I'm making, I'm making sour cream. All I'm going to do is I'm going to skim the cream off of my milk and add a tablespoon of clabber in. Okay, that's sour cream that's going to sit and it's going to ferment and it's going to coagulate. I'm going to make cottage cheese and quark, really. It's like kind of like a cream cheese that we eat. I'm just going to make a giant pot of clabber. Half of it's going to go to cottage cheese and half of it's going to be strained off into cream cheese. So it's just like kind of streamlined all the processes in our kitchen, which is cool.
That is really exciting. I mean, one of the other things that Clabber has done to change your life is it's also allowed you this opportunity to start this business in
Yeah.
2021, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so can you share with us what inspired you to take that leap and start cheese from scratch?
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, so I'm actually a registered nurse, and I was just finding that I was just away from home so much, and I had three little kids, and I was coming off of maternity leave in Canada. We get really nice maternity leave, so I was going to be coming off maternity leave in like 6 months, and I was like, I just really don't want to go full time back to work. I want to stay home with my kids. So I decided that I was going to take my passion of cheese making and turn it into a business. So I actually started teaching not about clabber because during this whole journey I've become a better cheesemaker. But at that beginning when I first started in 2021, I had kind of sworn off clabber. I had tried clabber before, hadn't worked for me because I was doing it wrong and I wasn't feeding it properly. And so I kind of came into it with being like, that's a cool method. It's cool to think about, but it doesn't actually really work that good. So I built a course and then I just kind of started talking on Instagram and creating content and stuff. And then 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to go and learn live from David Asher, who we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. And he kind of showed me what I was doing wrong. And I was like, oh, wait, I was just doing it wrong. And then I started again. And then all my cheeses just like they tasted good before, but they just elevated so much. And so I really talk about it a lot now because I'm kind of on the journey with everybody is just kind of rediscovering clabber, and I'm on the journey as well. We're all kind of learning together, which is a cool thing.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, when I first heard about David Asher, because I was once we started looking into homesteading and then got our first dairy cow, naturally the conversation was, what do I do with all this milk? And then how do we stay self-sustainable on the farm? And I know rennet was something that once I looked into it, I'm like, well, how do I stay sustainable making cheese with all this milk if I have to be dependent on rennet? And then I found David Asher's book, who he's also a Chelsea Green author. I just haven't had like an opportunity to ping him because with Nourishing Asian Kitchen, like in our Asian culture, we don't have access to much dairy, or we hadn't traditionally. And so the only way that my mom had and my parents had access to dairy was either through water buffalo or when the French colonized Vietnam and they had things like sweetened condensed milk. So like there's a lot of recipes on that, but nothing on like raw dairy and how to use clabber. And so I am so fascinated to learn about that, and when I found David Asher, I was like, "Oh, he's talking about clabber," but I didn't feel like he doesn't have a lot of content online, it's like to follow,
Mhm.
and though I had his book, it was still really like, nobody else was talking about it when I was looking into it until I found your Instagram and saw that reel, and I was like, "Oh, she's using clabber." So that's really exciting, and so you have this class called the Homestead Cheesemaking 101 course, and you've
Yeah.
taught thousands of students. And so what does this course cover and what sets it apart from other cheesemaking resources?
So I like as I said, I created it right when I first started my business. I've updated a few things in there. Like now I have a link to be like, okay, this is how you make clabber. Because in that, I still have the video in there where I was like, no, it doesn't work. Like it's a cool idea, but it doesn't work. So I have a link in there now for like how to make clabber culture and stuff like that. But it basically takes you through all of the so that you can go from just knowing nothing to being able to make pressed cheeses for your family, because I feel like that's a lot of what homesteaders want to learn how to make is like pressed cheeses that have long-term storage for their family. So it talks about like all the ingredients and how you would buy them. I show you like we go online and look at the cheese supply website, which ones I would buy. It takes you through equipment, takes you through all of the different steps of cheese making. And then there's 3 tutorials in there for different cheeses that I specifically chose because they kind of each go through different steps that you're going to see in most cheese making recipes. So that at the end of the goal is that at the end of it, that you could go and you could do any cheese making recipe because you've kind of encountered these steps in the course. So I'm hoping to refilm it this because I did some really bad filming in there. I shouldn't say that about it, but it has helped it has helped thousands of people. But I have definitely become a better videographer in the last 3 years. So I'm hoping to refilm it this summer, and then that will obviously be available for anyone who's already a student as well.
Oh, that is really fascinating. So it's like a progressive class on I'm sure it's like starting with soft cheeses to obviously ending with the pressed cheeses.
Yeah, no, it doesn't go too much into soft cheeses actually.
Okay.
It's mostly just pressed cheeses.
Okay. Okay, see that's where I have been just afraid to fail because
Yeah.
even though like we get 5 to 7 gallons a day, I still feel bad if it were to go to waste, and so I need to get over that and just start trying with dairy. Dairy is just something that I'm not as comfortable with, and so that sounds like it's a perfect class for me to learn how to go from all this milk to turning into pressed cheeses, like
Yeah.
the cheeses that I could drink with some wine.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely like it's scary when you're first starting out and you don't want to waste cheeses, especially when you ran across me where I was throwing a wheel off of over the edge of the mountain because I was like, I screwed that cheese up. But one big thing that has been like so pivotal in me having less contaminations and less troubles in my cheese making is just using fresher milk. Like that would be something
Mm.
that a takeaway that I would just tell everybody is use the freshest milk that you can, like preferably warm from the udder, and you're going to have way less fails. You're going to have make better cheese with that. So that's been a big thing that I kind of noticed.
That's awesome because a couple months ago, I was a part of Sandor Katz's fermentation residency, and he had a woman there, her name's Sierra Leone, and she taught a basic cheese making, just soft
Yeah.
cheeses. And one of the things that she said was about sourcing and obviously but the thing that she said was the best cheese that she made has always been from, going to the farmer and then taking the milk directly and then rushing home to make her cheese. And I was like,
Yes.
"Wait, wait, wait," because in my mind, as, someone who just cares for the milk, we're always talking about how do we cool the milk down as quickly as
Yeah.
possible, right? And so it's like when we milk the cow, it's almost like a race to get the milk into the fridge, and so here she's like,
Yeah.
"A race to get it into the pot to make your cheese."
Yeah. It's kind of a different way of thinking because there's basically two ways you can preserve milk. You can put it in the fridge, like get it in there as fast as possible, or you can put it in the cheese pot, and that is a form of preserving milk. I was actually just reading David Asher's new book that came out. I just got it today. And he was talking in there about how our view on like sterility and cheese making and stuff is like basically from it's not really current with how what we know about microbiology now. Like it's more it was what was we were thinking about in the 1960s basically.
Mhm.
So it's kind of interesting to be kind of moving towards looking at microbiology as protection for our milk, which is it's a hard thought to get your brain around when we've been drilled into us for like our entire lives about raw milk safety and that raw milk is dangerous and that you have to refrigerate milk, that it can't sit out. Like all of that is a really hard concept to get to kind of push away and be like, okay, bacteria can actually protect our milk for us.
Yeah, that's fascinating because I was a biology major. I was pre-med
Yeah.
before, and, all the things when we talk about fermentation and molds and microbiology, I went just while we were talking and as part of the fermentation residency, we were talking about what happens to our food with mold spores and things like making koji and making natto and making tempeh and how, it really transforms our food and we talked about food waste and what it really means, what safety is and
Yeah.
how, the definitions now have changed a lot in terms of, what is safe. But if you go back and think about it traditionally, without all the science knowledge that we learned back in the '60s from
Mhm.
back in the '60s. I mean, this is how the traditional cultures lived, right? At least in the
Yeah.
Asian culture, this is how they made soy sauce was using koji spores, right? Or how they
Yeah.
made milk and from cheese and yogurt from milk was
Yeah.
through traditional fermentation without
Yeah.
refrigeration, right? And so it's just
We've kind
fascinating.
of like dug ourselves like a hole as a society a little bit because the more we've learned, the more we've realized that we don't know. And at the end of the day, it's just like such a simple process. Like milk just wants to be cheese. All you have to do is, let it sit out and it will eventually clabber. It will eventually turn to cheese. Like that's maybe not the best cheese that you're going to ever eat, but like it's such a simple process and that's like a lot of times what kind of stops people from starting because they're like there's so much information, it's so scary, they're like I have to know all of these things, and then you don't. Like back in the day, way back in the day, they didn't know all these things, but they were still making really really excellent foods for their families.
Exactly, and the process of, even making yogurt in, Asian traditional cultures, even today, what they'll do is they'll actually put the yogurt in bed with the children because the temperature is about 70s to 80s, and that's by the time they wake
Yeah.
up in the morning, they've got yogurt.
I love that. I never heard that before. That's excellent. My kids
So
are gonna wake up and be like, oh, I've got yogurt next to me. That's
well,
funny.
I was I was reading that that's kind of what your family's primary goal, to work together, and it's our
Yeah.
family's goal too, is to work together to make and grow our own food. So, how has this lifestyle impacted your children's understanding of food production and sustainability?
Oh, that's a big question. I don't know. I think it's just made them aware of it. Like,
Mm.
even if they grow up and they choose not to farm, like, they're going to know where food comes from. They're going to have seen and experienced and helped us grow all sorts of different foods for our family and make all sorts of foods for our family. And I hope that, when they grow up, that they will want to come back and back to kind of this lifestyle and make some foods from scratch and stuff like that. But if they don't, at least they know where food comes from. And I think that's going to be something that they just always keep with them.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of the things that we hope to strive to teach our kids too is just learn the basic skills and appreciation for where our food comes from, whether or not they decide to stay food producers in the future, but at least they have those skills that they can carry on with them and the appreciation
Yeah.
for it too.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually a funny story. My daughter and I were just talking about this not that long ago, maybe about a month ago. And I was at the Modern Homesteading Conference. So we were driving to town and we lived really far from town. So I was practicing my presentation in the car and she was just kind of being a little bit frustrated. Like, we've heard this presentation so many times, Mom. Like, why do we have to like know this stuff? And I was like, well, it's not for it's for mommy practicing or whatever. But I was like, if you are ever on that show Cash Cab, I don't know if you have that in the US. It's like you get into the cab and then it's like a game show and they ask you all sorts of questions. I was like, if you're ever on that show Cash Cab and they ask you a cheese question, you're gonna know all the answers. So that's what I told her. That was my answer for
Okay.
her.
That'll be funny if that
Yeah.
actually happens.
Yeah, if it actually happens, she will know all the cheese answers.
Oh, my daughters are the same too when they hear me
Yeah,
on, like, podcast interviews. They're like, "We've heard
yeah,
that same story." I'm like, "Yep, that is our
yeah,
story." And
yeah. We're really grinding it in. You're gonna know it. Yeah,
well, as a mom of 3, right?
yeah, 3.
How how do you balance running this successful business with family life on the farm?
I feel like it's gotten easier actually having a business at home than it was before I like worked off the farm. It's just so much more family centered. Like today I worked on like cheese from scratch stuff, but I was home with my kids all day, which is just so cool. And yeah, I think that it's actually gotten easier than being able to bring my job home than versus having to go off the farm and work and leave my kids. So that's been kind of something cool about having a home-based business.
Wow, I love that. I love that. And for those who are interested in starting their own homesteading journey, maybe even thinking about owning a cow, what advice would you give based on your experience?
I would say for getting a cow, research, 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 research. You can't research enough. But for cheese making, just start. You just have to dive in and start. If you have the cow already, um, you're going to learn the most just by doing. So that's my advice for cheese making.
Mhm. That's great. And you have the Milkmaid Society, right? Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it's like a monthly membership club for milkmaids. So I create content, but I also hire other milkmaids, which has been really cool. Kind of my goal around it was also to hire most of them actually are other moms so that they can, get a little bit of extra income for their homesteads and be able to stay home with their babies more, hopefully. So yeah, there's all sorts of different resources on there on cheese making, dairy processing, milk cows, and dairy goats. So yeah, it's kind of become like this massive resource. I actually launched it 2 years ago and I was
Mhm.
thinking the other day, I was like, holy, there is a lot of content on there.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that you have a heart to also serve the other moms and milkmaids out there so that they can provide an income for their families too.
Yeah, it's cool just to have kind of the community feel around it.
Yeah, I love that. And well, can you tell us more about the projects that you're excited to be working on and anything you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, well, my biggest project that I've been working on this year is I just gave my manuscript in for my book. So I'm gonna have a homestead cheesemaking book coming out spring 2025. So that has like encompassed all my all my brain and energy lately. But yeah, it's getting edited right now. So that will be something that's very exciting coming up.
Oh, I'm so excited for you, and I'm excited for that book. I can't buy
Yeah.
enough natural cheese making books. But
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's
I'm
gonna
gonna
be, and it's gonna be kind of like it's gonna have natural cheese making in for it for sure, but it's also gonna have, like how to use a freeze dried culture and stuff like that too, because sometimes it is just so overwhelming when you're starting. You're like, how am I gonna learn this natural cheese making? Whereas if you just buy the culture offline, it's sometimes a little bit easier. So it's a hybrid between the two different methods.
Oh, absolutely, and that's something I'm interested in. I get that, obviously, if we can be as sustainable as possible, that's a huge benefit, but
Yeah,
if it can also simplify my life for now until we have to be sustainable
yeah,
completely with making our own rennet, until that day
yeah,
comes, I'm perfectly fine with using freeze-dried, rennet. Um,
Yeah, exactly. Or well, freeze-dried culture. Rennet is a little bit trickier to make at home, but one day maybe I'll get there. But I think I'll probably for most of my cheese making, I always buy my Rennet online.
yeah. Okay, and you'll have resources for all of that in your book.
Yes, yes, all of that will
Okay.
be in the book.
Okay, well, we're all excited for your spring 2025 natural cheese making book to come out.
Great,
And
thanks.
one last question that I would want to ask is looking back on your journey from that first day with the milk cow to
Yeah.
where you are now, what's been the biggest surprise or biggest lesson learned?
Biggest surprise or biggest lesson learned? Oh, that's a really hard question. There's been so many big surprises and things that are really hard to learn. I think that probably just learning about the milk cow was probably the biggest surprise for me, just as I was talking about, that I thought I knew a lot about cows, and then I was like, oh, I don't, I don't know a lot about cows, kind of thing, or about dairy cows. So that was probably the biggest thing in terms of cows, is just relearning how to take care of a milk cow and the things that I needed to know about it. And then in terms of cheese making, probably the biggest surprise would be, I guess maybe the fails. Like I just thought, that I would just follow a recipe and it would probably turn out how it was expected to turn out, and then sometimes it didn't, and not all, like sometimes it turned out really great and then sometimes it didn't. And so that was a big kind of surprise for me at first, until I really started to embrace the fact that you do have to use fresh milk, and it does have to come from a good healthy source that you're taking care of, and everything is kind of connected in cheese making and owning a milk cow or owning a dairy animal, that what they're eating can influence the cheese and stuff. And it's a really cool part of homestead cheese making, but it is something that was kind of surprising at the beginning.
Oh, I love that. That's one of the biggest surprises for me and homesteading in general. The fact that, like,
Yeah.
when we can get as fresh as we can to the source and knowing what our animals ate, what our vegetables were grown in, our food tastes completely different. I mean, I don't know if it's because it's infused with all of the love and intention and care that we've had for our food now, but everything changes. Like the flavor profile or and definitely the nutrition profile as well changes
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
improve.
exactly. And it's cool how it's all just connected. You have a milk cow, but now you have compost for your garden, and you make cheese from the milk, and then now you have whey and you put it on your garden, and it's just this giant loop, and it's all connected, and it's so cool.
Yeah. I actually have you ever tried I lied, there was one more question, maybe
Yeah.
2. Have you ever made whey cheese, the brown cheese?
Yes, I've failed at making whey cheese because I was impatient. I didn't wait long enough. But I make whey caramel all the time, which is very similar. You just don't go quite as long. So yeah, I make whey caramel sometimes.
Okay, I've tried making whey cheese, and I had a lot of whey to start off with, and by the time I don't know if I overcooked it or not overcooked it, but over evaporated it
Yeah.
before I added the cream, but yeah, I think I needed to add some sort of sugar or something in there. It just didn't taste as great. I have tried it once and loved it. Tasted like a
Yeah.
fudge, but yeah, I didn't have
Somebody
to.
had some at work one time. They had brought it back from Europe somewhere, and I was like, "Oh, this is really yummy," but I haven't tried to make it since then because I didn't really understand, I don't think, what whey cheese was when I first tried to make it.
And
It took a long time, and I was like, "This is a waste of time."
it just took a long time, and I don't know if
Yeah.
it technically counts as cheese, does it?
Well, I guess I don't know. I guess so. If you add sugar, then it's caramel. But if you if you're just adding cream, I would say it would still be cheese,
Still be cheese? Okay,
like processed cheese.
yeah, that's right. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much, Robin, for your time and this wonderful conversation. For any of our listeners that wants to learn more about you, where can they find you online?
Probably Instagram is the best place to find me. I'm on there pretty much every day. It seems crazy, but yeah. So cheese from scratch with little underscores under after each one. And then also, I'm trying to be better on my YouTube channel, just because long form videos are much nicer for learning how to take care of milk cows and learning cheese making and stuff. So I also have a YouTube channel.
Wonderful. And then your website is
Yes, and then my
cheesefromscratch.com.
website. Yeah, cheesefromscratch.com. And I've got, yeah, some blog posts on there, and I send out a newsletter every Monday. So yeah, so that's usually kind of got a lot of different information in there. And yeah, my cheese making course and my membership are all on the website.
Okay, great. And then your book will would just need to be on your newsletter to find out when that comes out.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Robin,
Oh,
and
thank you for
looking
having me.
forward to seeing you again at Modern Homesteading Conference next year.
Yeah, exactly. Me too. Awesome. Thanks, Sophia.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.